to very quickly general business. The reason I want to do this,
Just ask, the audit report is very simple and straightforward to read. It only takes 30 seconds to see that everything complies. We could move back onto that one before and allow that part of the meeting to be
I'm just
completed.
conscious of our public here, they want to see that stuff. Let's deal with general minor items right now. So we've got 3 here from Councillor Belford, Otani Wastewater.
Yes, I mean,
With the microphone, sorry, please.
a number of us have been, I think, recipients of a variety of emails raising concerns about where that process stands, the fact that the consent for that system expires, I believe, today. It apparently has been the matter of a fair amount of negotiation between us and the CHB. I'd just like to get a report at some point as to what is that all about, what are the issues, what should we be expecting to happen there as it goes forward. So,
Napier Pandora.
yeah, the most recent report we got with the consent applications indicated that Napier City Council was applying for some kind of structural foundation or something. It appears that there's a water feature or something they want to build out in Pandora Pond. I'd just like to know what that's all about. What is that?
Maybe answer that?
Well, we don't need to answer it now.
Oh, okay, it might only take 2 seconds, hopefully, sorry.
It's a,
It's a Napier City Council. We've got a concept for a floatable play structure, but to be anchored in that area, so that they're seeking consent for the anchors.
okay, just for the anchors, okay. And the third one was Mark Lawrence.
Yeah, you'd be, we have a constituent out here who seems to be wanting to take down a seawall that was a matter of some controversy, I gather, a while back when he was trying to put it in the first place or whatever. And I don't, is he getting, he claims that
He did yesterday.
that he's stalled out here because he's not hearing from us, is that?
No, he got advice yesterday, but he's been dealing with me
All right,
individually as well, but he did get some pretty fulsome advice from us
so we can
yesterday.
set all these aside.
Well, yeah, he may come back. But. Okay, Go Bus, Councillor Hewitt.
Has been reported, we awarded the contract to Go Bus, and I note in the newspaper subsequently that Nimmans are alleging that we've awarded contracts to the lowest priced, and that they're underpaying their staff compared to how Nimmans do. So I'm interested in a response to that, because it certainly wasn't part of the tendering process as I understood it. A public response to that.
Respond.
On sorry, clarification, a public response on whether or not they underpay. Okay, so I'll give public response right now is they were the lowest price and the highest quality. End of story.
So there's we're not involved in low pay, underpaying or any of those discussions. I just thought that wasn't anything to do with our discussions. Thank you.
No input at all into how they contract their employees.
So highest quality is.
It was the highest quality, lowest price. It was the best outcome.
Thank you. Okay. Very simple. Let's, so just so the members of the public are clear, so now we'll do the HBRIC report, which has a public excluded component to it, which is where we may end up at the end of that. So let's get the team in, please. No, June. No, June. You. Let's do that now. Okay. So we've had a mover and a seconder. Do you wish to speak to it?
It's always very good to get
Deal
this
with
out
it.
of the way, Mr Chairman. The report is well presented. Nice little calibre at the front. People want to read that bit with lots of meaty detail to follow. So
2 minutes.
just pleased to move that we adopt the annual report and a very clean audit report, Mr Chairman.
It is, yeah. And the seconder was, who was the seconder for that?
I missed it.
So who can, you happy to second that? You wish to speak, Councillor Dick? Happy? Any other speakers? Councillor Graham, yeah.
So everyone knows that I'm really unhappy with the numbers, the numbers that tenders numbers. And in the first instance, to illustrate that some people think this is important, especially our constituency, I was rung by the press who inquired about my perceived poor attendance record. The attendance numbers were quoted, slipped under her door by someone who I can only assume is an unfriendly party. In any event, the press thought it important enough to discuss it with me and wondered why I'd only attended 70% of the prescribed meetings. And that was a very vigorous discussion proceeded. The figures are misleading. Firstly, they include a set of field days and meetings that some enlightened soul has deemed more important than others. As an example, the apology to Kahununu in the signing of the Heratonga Tamatea Settlement Agreement, which 2 councillors attended on Saturday, and it took us all day, was not deemed important and recordable, but I presume the visit to South Island dam sites was. Secondly, the stats are inconsistent and misleading, as each councillor has a different amount of meetings to attend. Councillor Barker has 66 recordable meetings to attend, and Councillor Wilson has 56 meetings to attend. So how do you get a balanced stat out of that? But the most pertinent point is, and I don't wish to make light of this, but it is absurd to judge councillors' performance on how many meetings they attend. By definition, this means that if Homer Simpson were a council, and I'm certainly not casting aspersions on any of my esteemed colleagues, but if he were, and he attended all the prescribed meetings but contributed nothing except eating his lunch, by this methodology, Homer would be adjudged a good and hard-working councillor. In the final analysis, some people think meeting attendances is important criteria to judge councillor performance, and especially on this criteria. And because they do, rightly or wrongly, I feel that my own council is undermining my credibility as a councillor by publishing this subjective data.
Thank you. Other speakers? Mr. Summer. I'll put the motion then. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And against. Carried. Thank you. Right. Another annual report ticked off. Right. HBRIC. Gentlemen. So welcome, gentlemen. Who's our chairman today? I am. Ah, Chairman Scotland. Well done. Well, welcome anyway. Let's get into it. So we're on page 41.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, Sam and I are here with our chair, Andy. Andy still away, so I'll hand over to our CEO to go through the paper if there's
thanks.
Cover any questions.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, everybody. I'll quickly run through the report in relation to a couple of the work streams: design and construction and financing. And I've got Duncan McLeod and Duncan Southwell here, who I'll get up to the table on the sec, with Duncan McLeod talking about water uptake, and both Duncan McLeod and Duncan Southwell talking about the forecasting, water uptake forecasting material. Okay, so that's sort of the process here. So just moving on to design and construction, that's one work stream. We had hoped to have that and slightly more advanced by the time we hit this meeting. But the big activity there that's going on right now is a price revalidation. So what that entails is the constructors revalidating their dam primary distribution network and secondary distribution network price, because it's over 18 months ago since we last had that price. So obviously there's a bit of work to be done there. And that's actually going reasonably well, just albeit it's about 3 to 4 weeks off where we wanted to be. So we expect that as of the next couple of days, we'll have the price on the dam and primary distribution network, which we'll need to review and have a pretty close look at, with the balance being the secondary distribution network coming through in around about mid-October, mid to the third week of October. And I'd just finally note on that issue that the secondary, when I'm talking about secondary distribution, that's effectively the pipes that run to a farmer's gate or past the property, and that's a pretty important decision because that ultimately determines where water will and will not go. So it's a pretty crucial piece of the puzzle that we're dealing with there. Just a couple of other things. We've been a wee bit of media commentary around Mangatarata Hautuma area and moving water down into that area. So we are getting a price for a primary distribution network, which essentially looks at moving water off the stored water off the Tukituki tributary down into Lake Hautuma and then down the Mangatarata stream. So that'll be part of the process.
So just a question
yep.
around that.
Yep.
So obviously if you increase the footprint
Yep.
available, does that extra piece of infrastructure actually add any extra cost overall? Or do they, by spreading it, does it actually keep it roughly the same?
No, the further you spread sort of does put some in the secondary distribution network, that will be a point of price tension in the repricing process clearly. But it will just wait and see what we get because we've optimised other parts of in particular the primary distribution network as well since that price was done. So the answer is we'll see what we get, basically. But spreading water further drives additional cost. It has some other benefits though. It spreads for example, in environmental sense, it spreads the nutrient load into a further area, so it diffuses some of those issues. So it's a bit of a roundabouts issue, but we just need to see where we're at. Okay.
Councillor Belvin.
Yeah, I have 3 questions about this section. The price revalidation, might I assume that will be an upward movement in price, or are you going to keep us in suspense till next month on that
Well, we're
issue?
going to keep you in suspense because we don't know.
All right, okay.
But what I would say is that the constructor is well aware of price tension. So, okay.
How long will that price be good for, as it were? Once you've arrived at a recalculation of this, is that going to have a lifespan to it, or?
Oh yes, but look, I haven't even asked that question myself, actually, frankly. But it's reasonable to assume that price is valid through what we think might be a financial close period.
And lastly, regarding the secondary water distribution, won't you basically have to be making a kind of a estimate or a projection of where you think that additional water, right now, later on, you're saying 50% of the required water is committed, so there's 50% in the pipeline that you're talking about later on here. The secondary distribution cost will be dependent on where you think that second half is coming from, won't it? Maybe.
Yeah, well,
So how firm can that number be, actually?
Oh, that number can be very accurate, actually. So if you think about just distributing water directly to 50% of the ultimate customer base, there's 2 decisions there. One is how far does that go, and then secondly, the next decision and piece of quite sophisticated engineering design is on the size of the pipes. So there's a judgment call on capacity and pressure, and ultimately where we expect to see demand post that initial threshold take place, and building into the design of the secondary distribution network capacity for that. So that is part of the process that they're doing. And ultimately, it's always been part of the construction schedule that we had what was I just need to remember the actual technical term for it, but it was a schedule of rates effectively for 50% of the secondary network and a fixed time, fixed price on the first tranche. And that's exactly the same contractual format we're doing. Finally, the other point is that in terms of actually building that final part of the network, secondary distribution network, that can be scheduled as demand takes place. So it doesn't necessarily need to happen inside the 3-year construction window. So it's a sort of it's quite a big optimisation process going on there.
Thank you.
Mr. Mohi.
Yes, so do you realise that Lake Whaatuma is as high as it's ever been for the last 20 years? So if at the moment you were to block it up, you would already have a dam there for that distribution at that end.
Well, I hadn't looked at it lately, Mr. Moy, I must admit. But yeah, so we actually, just traverse that a wee bit further though, had the climatic pattern remained more or less what it was looking like in August and early September, we would have thought that there was a fair chance that Lake Whaatuma would have actually dried up through the summer as opposed to containing water in it. So it's, but yeah, there's been a significant tranche of rain. I will comment a wee bit on reservoir issues, perhaps at some stage in this discussion as well, where it would sit today, where it would have sat ahead of that rain event that we've just had. To give you a bit of a flavour for that, I'll come back to that. Happy for me to go on to financing?
Finance, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
was
So where we are today, we have 4 potential investors at various stages of due diligence with the project. 3 parties are expected to deliver their terms and conditions to us within pretty much this period now that we're in. One, in fact, has actually done it last night. And ultimately, those terms and conditions, it's good, probably a couple of comments. It'll be good to have a bit of competition in the mix. So it looks as though we're going to end up in that place. And secondly, obviously, those terms and conditions are subject to quite a detailed negotiation process, ultimately, which within reason we'd hope to be reasonably well advanced on through this month of October. So we're making reasonably solid progress there. And I would say, though, clearly we're not in a position to publicise those investors until such time as there's a decision that the HBRIC board would make around a preferred investor and locking into a single relationship. Okay. All right. That's yep.
Busy reading. Sorry, Councillor Belford.
Moving on to order, uptake at that point?
Yep.
A couple of questions. Terms and conditions, is it conceivable that an investor would, as a condition, want to see more committed uptake than the numbers that we have been using, which are whatever it is, 45 million? Is that something that is open to them to?
Yes, it is. Yep. Yep.
And we would know about that if that were to happen?
Oh yes, and we would know about that, and that'll be part of a process of making a decision around a preferred, actually.
The second paragraph here refers to the Tuki Tuki Limited Partnership. And it refers to the need for commercial confidentiality. Mr. Chairman, do you want to reserve to the end of this discussion that issue of going into public excluded, or because I mean, here's the issue. Here's where the issue is raised. I mean,
We make a decision on public excluded at the end of the open report.
so you want to discuss that issue later? At that point, when you make that move?
Yes.
Okay. Then just to the last point here, we'll have a base case financial model ready for Deloitte to review by 28 October.
Yeah, so we're aiming to do that. That's dependent on 2 things, 2 critical issues. One is clearly that we've got a construction price that we're happy with, number one, and then secondly, that we have a set of investors sufficiently advanced on their terms and conditions that we can blend that information into the financial model, and so therefore that's why I've been quite deliberate in saying we're aiming to have that done by the 28th of October, ready for this meeting.
So what that means is that
Yep.
we would be handed the case, then yet to proceed with Deloitte and
Yep.
get their review of it.
Yep.
Given that earlier you mentioned November 11th as a deadline for water uptake, why wouldn't you wait till after that deadline is passed to put this business case together?
because ultimately, irregardless of the 11th November date for farmers, ultimately the whole investment framework is going to look at and test all of the material commercial terms and conditions, including the vitamin water contracted.
Mr. Chairman, that's one of the reasons why we're talking about the forecast water uptake model in detail today, because that's obviously a key input in terms of both you and your advisors going through that detail. So that's why we're going to some trouble today, and why we've got Duncan and Duncan here to talk to the model as well.
Yep.
I know you're going to raise it later, but there's a question that comes out of this about the need for commercial confidentiality. The Regional Council's Code of Conduct talks about two things. One, about openness and transparency, being the model we should follow. And secondly, that public excluded has it restricted in our Code of Conduct to legal matters. So when you're talking this, I'd like you to address both of those issues. So to make sure that it's consistent with our Code of Conduct, which talks specifically about legal, and commercial confidentiality is not necessarily a legal matter, it's about commerce.
Right, thanks.
Okay, let's continue.
All right, so happy for me to move on to water uptake?
Yes.
Right, okay, so,
think so.
Duncan, might get Duncan, you up first, actually, if you can. So just by way of introduction for those of you who don't know Duncan, you may or may not know Duncan. Duncan looks after the commercial manager for the scheme, and also looks after the water uptake process. So is, with a team sitting in behind Duncan.
Right, thank you. We're away. Yep, thank you. Well, I guess it's a reasonably clear summary, I think, but I just wonder whether it might be worthwhile taking people through the table that's included here, because I guess at first glance it can just be a page of numbers, and so if that would have value to the council, I'm happy to, I guess, direct you around it. So this is, I think, a format that's new to this group, but I've been collating this information for a wee while like this. So this is a summary, an automated summary of, I guess, our tracking of 422 individual properties in the Ruataniwha proposed dam footprint. So across the top there we've got funnel stage, so that reflects the, I guess, the stage in the decision-making process the landowner is in for each of these properties. And the total, if you look out to the right-hand side, FMIs in each stage, excuse me, and FMI is the farm management ID. And so there's a total of 422 properties, and each of them is, I guess, we've identified as being in a different stage of the decision-making process. So the key areas out the far right-hand side, NP is not progressing, and there's a key for this down in the bottom left-hand corner of the table, but NP is not progressing. So there's 170 people of the 422, or 170 properties of the 422 that have decided that they're not going to be part of the scheme in time for financial close. If we look at the zeros, the ones and the twos, they're the groups that are still in the decision-making process, so they haven't said they're not interested, but they haven't said that they absolutely are yet either. And so there's a total of about 130 people or farms that sit in that group, and there's about 21 million cubes that we've identified that could be used on those properties sitting in that group.
Is that, or can you correlate that to your ABC? Is that, are those the
Oh, that's a different metric, Councillor Belford, but to explain that now, so each of those properties, so for instance a 2, the property might be a 2A. So A, B and C reflects the likelihood that we as the, I guess, the team have assessed them of actually becoming a water user. So a 2A is someone that hasn't made the decision yet, but we think they're ultimately going to be a yes. A 2B, for instance, would be someone who's genuinely still making up their mind, and a 2C is, well, we think on the balance they probably won't be, but they haven't actually said they're not interested at this stage. So each FMI is categorised as a number and a letter.
So could you have a 5, there's such a thing as a 5C?
There's one.
There is one?
One, yeah, there's one, yep. So that's someone who's, so the next, so a really important cut-off that we've talked about, so that's 1 out of 54. So the next cut-off is, so stage 3 is where someone said, yes, I want to be a water user. This is how many hectares I'd like to irrigate. This is how many cubes of water I want to buy. Can you please generate me a water user agreement? And so they go out signed by Andrew. And so 3 and above is where there's a real step, if you like, from the farming community towards ultimately becoming a water user. 4 and 5 is just transactional, so that's either the agreements in the process of getting generated or it's out with the potential water user, their advisors, financial advisors, or trustees for that matter. Quite a bit of family trust ownership down in that area. And a 6 is, that's what we need, 40 or 45 million cubes of for the project to proceed. So 6 is signed and returned. So some of the information, to your question, Councillor Belford, earlier around construction, where this has been useful is we've actually identified, if we go down the right-hand side, not just the cubes that people are looking to use, and there's a distinction here between irrigable hectares, which reflects how much the aggregation of how much land could be irrigated on all of these properties, versus hectares to irrigate, which is the amount of land they're looking to irrigate in the first instance. And so even if we look at the stage 6s there, so 20 million, or 20 and a half, it's actually 21 million cubes as at today, they could have irrigated 9,000 hectares on those 57 properties, but at the moment they're contracting for 6,117 hectares on those 57 properties. So people have been understandably conservative in 2 areas at the moment, and one is the amount of volume they're signing up to per hectare. So they're not quite taking as much as they should from a scientific or an informed perspective. And the other aspect is they might have 150 hectares they could irrigate, but they're looking to do, 80 first because they just want to sort of have a bit of a look. And that's pretty common, right through this funnel here. So I think that's sort of, and I guess the comments that are, the words that are written are all essentially taken out of the table. Yep.
Can you just maybe comment on 2 things? One is the significance of the irrigable hectares number out on the far right. That's the far right irrigable hectares, and also then give a wee bit of a value judgment around the not progressing in terms of, because that sort of blends reasonably well into the next paper. Okay.
Yep, sure. So as you'll see out the far right-hand column under irrigable hectares, we've identified just under 41,000 hectares that could be irrigated within the footprint we've identified. As far as accuracy of that information, if you just look to the number below it, we've populated an area for 409 of the 422 properties, so we're 97% populated across the group. So we've got a pretty good understanding of not just how much irrigable land there is on these properties, but where it sits spatially, which is going to be pretty important for design decisions at some stage in the future. Around the not progressings, I guess we've sort of categorised where we can the reason why those properties aren't looking to become irrigators at the moment, and it's a mix of age and stage, scale. Like you'll see, those 170 properties there have 10,000 irrigable hectares on them, whereas if you look at the stage 6, we've got 57 farms that have got 9,000 irrigable hectares on them. So there's an aggregation of small properties in the 170 as well. And so age and stage is in there. A lot of them don't actually intend to be landowners there in 5 or 10 years' time, so they're sort of looking to succeed in one way or another, often through sale. And I guess there's a reasonable amount of them that would be interested in leasing their property to a third party who was looking to be an irrigator. So we've got a bit of inquiry from people around that as well.
Councillor Belford, you had a question?
Just turning to the text itself on page 42, opposite that table. So when the comment is made, we're approaching 50% of the minimum water, is that essentially adding up 4, 5, and 6?
No, I think that's referring to the 20.5 million cubes. That's actually a 6. So it's 50% of the 40 or 45 million cubes.
But what's the numerator? Is the numerator the numbers under 4, 5, and 6?
No, it's the numbers under 6, so
Just
20.478
the 20.
million cubes, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
A little further down, it says there are a number of outstanding issues that they are wanting a final decision on, such as the water price. Why is the water price changing? What's that referring to?
I hope not, but I guess the commercial reality is that until we understand where the construction prices come in and there's been an institutional investor lockdown, the water price can't change under the existing agreement. So it's set in the existing water user agreement. But I guess if there's an outcome from the price revalidation or from the negotiation with the institutional investor which suggests the price needs to change, that can't be confirmed until those two pieces of the puzzle have actually...
So that price that I'm understanding to be currently 26 cents.
That's right,
That's
yeah.
the price we're talking about.
That's the price in the contract, and we
That
can't
price
move
could
that
change.
price.
That price could change.
Well, as I said, I hope it doesn't. But until those aspects are resolved, I don't think you can outright rule out that
So
changing.
everybody would have to be revisited as to whether an extra 2 cents or something was something they were prepared to swallow.
That would absolutely be correct, yes.
Okay.
And we would have to recontract.
May I continue? Just go down to the last paragraph there. I just find it hard to understand what that's, if I can break it apart. As evidence from the above commentary, we need to resolve the DNC price revalidation, understand that. What's the next clause mean? Investor terms to a preferred status. What is that saying?
As I noted earlier, we have 4 investors working through a process in due diligence. And ultimately, this process is designed to get us down to 1 institutional investor.
Right.
And ultimately, that decision will be an HBRIC board decision as to who the preferred investor is, assuming we get there.
Mm-hmm.
Their terms and conditions, and I guess without speaking on Jim and Sam's behalf, I'd simply say that the most favourable terms and conditions to the scheme, et cetera, will probably lend itself to the preferred investor. And the preferred investors' terms and conditions flow into, for example, the question you asked earlier, which was, do they agree with a 45 million cubic metre water uptake threshold or not, if they got a different number?
Right.
Those are the sorts of moving bits that we need to nail down, okay?
Okay, and then
So that's what that's about.
that re-clarifies, and then the reissue the water user agreement, what that's a reference to is if, as a
Yeah,
result of all of
if we've
that,
got changes,
the
yes.
pricing needs
Yeah,
to
yeah.
change or
Yep.
something like that.
Yep, Steve, right. Yep.
So it's a pretty fluid, if you will, situation.
Oh, there's like the pun, but there's movement going on, and what we've got is a process which is obviously narrowing and honing that down to a point where we get solidity. So October, at the rate we're going, is an important month, clearly.
Before the forecast, perhaps, Councillor Barker?
A couple of questions. On the last bullet point under the summary, we continue to have significant external interest in the scheme. I take that to mean that there are parties who wish to farm in the area who don't have land, are looking to secure water and then secure land at the same time, and you're in that, what was referred to before as people wishing to exit their properties in the NP. So is that what we're talking about with that?
That's correct. Yep.
Just want to make sure that.
Yep.
On your chart, I want to come back to the issue that we have the conditions precedent and we've got financial close coming up. And one of the conditions precedent is that we have sold, before we get to financial, we have 40 million cubic metres sold, and we're looking at this happening, according to the paper, sometime before the end of this year or maybe the beginning of next year. So looking at this, we have here, at best, with the stage 3 and above, 35 million cubic metres sold. That seems to say to me that we're falling short of the target. That's if everybody in 3, 4 and 5 agrees, if we get 100% of that in the next 3 months, we're still short.
Oh, yeah, clearly if we got to 35 and stopped, then you're absolutely right, that's not sufficient to meet that condition. So the question that the board asks, and equally that Duncan and myself and the sales team look at is effectively across that whole data set, ultimately what's our forecast for uptake beyond 35, and will we get there? And we've got that narrowed down to quite precisely to individual customers, individual farms, and individual probabilities, which is reflected in the ABC category. So you might want to answer
Yes,
that.
so if I,
Yep.
I could provide a little bit more detail around that if you like. So in the 0 to 2 category, for instance, there's 5 million cubes that we've identified as A, if you like, so of that number that's sitting there, and just under 13 million cubes that's sitting as a B. So I guess it's a success rate or probability call. But I mean, I'm absolutely confident we've got enough people in the room. It's just we've got to get them through the right door.
But
Say that since July, category 6 has been 20 million, hasn't changed since your July report to us. That's how many cubic meters have been actually signed up. So there's been no change to that number in the last 60 plus days.
That's correct. It hasn't changed a lot in the last. I'm not sure whether it's July, but I'm sure you've checked.
are we looking at, say 3 months from now? Is that our time frame to close down between 20 and 45?
The timeframe that we've given the farmers is 11th of November.
So between 11th of November, that's a very auspicious day. I hope you made it 11 o'clock, but
11 p.m. possibly.
11 p.m., all right. But the thing is, we've now got to find, in effect, 20 million cubic metres minimum on the old formula between now and 11th of November.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Could I ask you to rate your chances on this?
Well, I think that's what the second subject in terms of the uptake model and takes us somewhere there in terms of. But the figures that you just mentioned of the 5 and the 13 are the outcome of your going through property by property. So the 5 and the 13, which is an additional 18, is where you and your team think you will get to. I guess the question is whether by the 11th of November or whether we might need an extra week or 2 weeks or whatever the issue is at that.
Yeah, look, I think clearly from a farmer uptake perspective, it would be a little better if we weren't still talking about price revalidation and naming our investor when we were sort of a little over a month away from our date. But those are the cards that we've been dealt.
But
You've got 5 and 13, you're only up to 38.
yeah.
Sorry, 35 plus 13 plus 5 would have to be quite a few more than 38.
Yeah, so 20 signed.
Yeah, so 3 and above, there's, as at today, there's 36 million cubes. So that's 3 and above. The 5 and the 13 I mentioned are still in the 0 to 2 category. Now, we won't get all of the 13 because by definition, they're still making up their mind.
So Ken, just to cut through all this, I mean, we either get there or we don't. We're talking about a whole lot of unknown stuff, and I wonder whether that was where Sam was going to come from.
Well, Chairman, I was just going to say before we dive down into the weeds and start getting each 500,000 cubic metres signed up, I mean, from my perspective anyway, this is always going to be the hardest thing of the scheme. Getting the consent has been bloody hard. We've got there. Getting the constructor has been a great effort, and we're nearly there. Getting the finance is just a matter of who gets the box seat. This was always going to be the hardest thing for us to do. We're asking farmers to change their lifestyle, change their balance sheet, change their way of farming, make decisions quickly. And Jim said we've put a date for water sales of 11th of November. And that's challenging. It's really challenging for our team. It's challenging for us, and we keep challenging management within HBRIC to get out there and do the very best they can. They put headlights on their cars and 24/7 sort of stuff. This is always going to be hard, and it's the greatest risk the scheme faces is farmers not signing up. So we, as well as the straightforward stuff here, we're doing some innovative things which I don't think we can disclose in public. But we are doing everything we can to get this water sold, because without water being sold, we haven't got a scheme.
Simple as that.
Councillor Dick.
The influences on the price would be the validation of the construction cost and also the terms of external finance.
Yeah, investor returns, yep.
Those two factors. Yeah. So it's tight, isn't it?
Yes.
And is there any reason why you did select the 11th of November, Armistice Day?
Well, actually, blame me. Sorry, I'll take responsibility for that.
Glad you said it and I didn't have to.
The first date I put was the Friday, the 11th of November. Then I looked at the calendar and turned out it was Friday, the 13th of November. I thought I'd better change that back to Wednesday, the 11th of November. But ultimately...
It's possibly got better symbolism.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about Armistice Day, I must admit. Look, when we were... our objective has been... or the board's objective has been to try and drive this deal to financial close prior to Christmas, basically. And in that process, there's the more of the deal that we can get consolidated, the CPs that we don't have moving anymore, the better, the more able we're to hopefully get this thing done by Christmas. So there was a bit of logic in saying the board needs to have a view on whether it's going to meet the water uptake CP by no later than the 11th of November.
Okay. How much clear time are you going to have between bedding down the water price and completing the sign-up?
At this stage...
Week or two?
We'll have 2 to 3 weeks.
The 28th of December looks a really good date.
Yep.
24th, be ambitious.
Councillor Graham.
I agree with Sam, absolutely. The biggest challenge here always was whether the farmers will take up the water for whatever reason, age, dollars, whatever reason, market, as we see in dairying. So that was always the challenge. What I want to know is, and it comes to me as a surprise, as it possibly does to Councillor Dick, that you have set that date. So what happens if we... I just want to comment just quickly, because I think I tire really of having 50% at 20. I mean, it's not. It's as Andrew pointed out to us, it's more like 46 million cubes needed, probably like 40, a bit higher than that. So we should stop saying 20 is 50. We've been saying that for 6 months. So just to get that right, I think. So what happens if we get to the 11th and you are 35 sold? What are we going to do?
I think through Jim, the key thing for us was we had to socialise a date to endeavour to get people to actually get some decisions done. And so that was the reason for this choosing the date, because we said if we could sort this thing out before Christmas, then that would be very, very helpful. I would imagine if we get to the 11th of November and we're sitting at 36 million cubes or whatever the figure is, the people that are already in and have signed up will reconsider their position and wonder whether or not they might put in more hectares, or they might change their rate per hectare and move that, or that there may be somebody come in who's at this stage is looking at a substantial volume of water and doing what Councillor Barker said in terms of coming in and finding land. And so, it's possible that you might get a 3 or 4 million hit, for example. And if people are in substantial negotiations with at the 11th of November, clearly we're not going to close off those discussions. That's how I would see the position.
So can I just ask a further question of that? Yes, we've got the 11th of November, but are you suggesting that if the board finds itself close, it will then have a further round of last call to go back to the investors and say to the people who have signed up, yes, you're in, but we're short of this amount. Do you want to reflect on this and maybe readjust your position so that we hit the 45 cubic metres? Are you suggesting that? So
yes.
I thought that's what you're saying there. So we're at 44% at the moment. If you do 20 over 45, so you've still got a bit of an uphill battle.
Yes. I mean, the board discussed the figures and Duncan's 5 million and 13 million, and the possibility of somebody else coming in with it at their last meeting, and said, obviously we're at this point, the sales team are telling us that they are on a one-by-one basis, that they are not sure of their figures because they're trying to interpret other people's reaction, but I've got confidence enough, and so the board took the view that we're here, we keep on going, we socialise the 11th of November and see where we get to.
But the real date is 28th of December.
Probably the 31st of January. I mean, 31st of December. I'm sorry, but no. I mean, what I don't want, and it's possibly going to happen, is, you know, we could extend the date. I mean, as far as we're concerned, we want water users to treat that date as something that we are keen to get in and closed on by that date. Absolutely.
But
Farmers, their advisors, their families, trustees, you know, it's a significant, and the community at large, in effect.
But I guess there'd also be a judgment call on this. If you were well short, you might just make the decision to stop then.
Yes.
So you're leaving a space for some judgment.
Yes.
That's fair enough. I agree with that.
Thank you.
Because the ultimate date is how long is the price construction price going to last for, Councillor Block, and we need to get started by March next calendar year or whatever the date is.
Last call did sound like a publican's term there, Councillor. Mark. I wonder where you may have heard that.
We don't have those things right now.
On the West Coast. Right, so where are we at in this discussion?
I think we're on to
Forecasts?
So I'd like to introduce Duncan Southwell. For those of you who don't know, Duncan Southwell's been involved from the BNZ for this project right from
Stay there, don't you?